Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel. And in this episode we are going back in depth with the TZAANGOR Enlightened from the Thousand Sons Codex. So what we do in these episodes is we run through all the stats, all the tactics, tricks and tips for this particular unit, and how best to optimise them for your games of Warhammer 40k 8th edition. Let's get straight into the video. So for those of you that don't know, this is what a unit of TZAANGOR Enlightened look like. They're sort of bird-like weird creatures from Tzeentch's Twisted Mind really, and they ride on those Tzeentch discs, which means they are pretty quick. So let's run through those stat lines. They have a move of 12 inches, a weapon skill of 3+, a ballistic skill of 3+, strength and toughness of 4. They come with 2 wounds and 2 attacks, although the Aviarch actually has 3 attacks. A leadership of 7, with the Aviarch having a leadership of 8, and they have a 6+ save. 6+ save isn't particularly great. They come stock as a unit of 1 Aviarch and 2 Enlightened for a power level of 3. You can include 3 additional Enlightened for an additional power level of 2, and up to 6 additional Enlightened with an extra power level of 4. Each model comes with a Divining Spear, and they ride those discs of Tzeentch, which I've mentioned before, which also get to attack. From a points perspective then, they are 15 points each before you add any of their weapons. Now with a Divining Spear they become 16 points each, and with a Fatecaster Bow they become 17 points each. You can also run them with chainswords and auto pistols, which are 0 cost, so that option they remain at 15 points a model. So just by example here, the unit that I have painted is 6 of these guys, so that means that they are a power level of 5, and they are 96 points because they have the Divining Spear. 16 points times 6 makes 96 points. So with regard to their weapons then, so probably arguably the worst combination for them is the auto pistol and chainsword. Now the only benefit they're going to get from that is a very short range pistol attack. That pistol is a strength 3 AP 0 damage 1 pistol at 12-inch range. You know, pretty much what cultists, Imperial Guard and so on carry. The only advantage is that chainsword, which is strength of user, AP 0 and damage 1, but you do get that additional attack for a chainsword. So that puts them up to 3 attacks each, or 4 attacks for the Aviarch. But that, in my opinion, is your worst option. Moving on to the arguably either or options now. I've gone with the Divining Spear, so let's talk about those first. The Divining Spear is +1 strength, AP 0 and damage 1. It is a melee weapon. The good thing is though, is that the damage is increased to 2 on a turn on which they charged. So you're always looking to get a charge off and then hit some heavy infantry, and that flat 2 damage will be pretty awesome. With regard to the Fatecaster Greatbow then, this is their shooty version. So they are a range of 24 inches, assault 2, strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1. No other bonuses or anything else to do with that. But a double-shotting TZAANGOR Enlightened, hitting on 3s with an Assault 2 weapon, Strength 5, AP -1 is pretty good. Now whichever method you're going to take, or whichever options you're going to take, the Disc of Tzeentch also has an ability to attack with its blades. That is a flat Strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, and you make those attacks after the Mount or the Aviarch or the Enlightened himself has made his attack, and you get 1 additional attack using that profile. Let's talk abilities then. These guys come with the Aura of Dark Glory, which removes that rubbish 6+ armor save and replaces it with a 5+ invulnerable save, which is far better. Although obviously there are weapons and war gear that can remove invulnerable saves, pushes you down back to that 6+, but the reality is 6+ isn't going to do a lot for you. They also have Guided by Fate, which means each time you make a hit roll of 6+ for a model in this unit, except for the disc blades itself, do not make a wound roll, it automatically is successful. And you can still take saving throws and so on against those attacks. But what it means is your Fatecaster Greatbows, Divining Spears and so on, because it does mean to hit roll in both melee and shooting, that any 6s you haven't got to worry about rolling to wound afterwards. The unit's faction keywords then are Chaos, Tzeentch, Heretic, Astartes and Thousand Sons. And the general keywords are Cavalry, Demon, TZAANGOR, Fly and Enlightened. So before we talk about the strengths and how to make this unit more than the sum of its component parts, and when we start adding psychic powers and stratagems to these guys and complementary buffing units, let's talk weaknesses. The biggest weakness being their save. Let's be honest, 2 wounds with a 6+ save or a 5+ invulnerable save makes them exceptionally vulnerable to small arms fire. So if you are an opponent of TZAANGOR Enlightened, what you want to do is line up your rapid fire bolt guns or your pulse rifles or pulse carbines or anything that puts out a lot of shots, low, sort of your average strength. These guys will soon get whittled down. They are still toughness 4, which is quite an impressive thing to have really on these guys. But you've got to remember, they are only 15 points a base cost. They are really cheap. They are sort of twice the cost of a regular TZAANGOR, but they do come with 2 wounds, which is the reason for that. But then you look at their movement 12 inches. But yeah, if you're looking to face these guys, lots of shots. Don't commit large, expensive units to try and take these down. What you really want to do is just, focus fire, lots of damage 1, high volume fire, and these guys will go down like a sack of spuds. So let's make these guys better by adding a TZAANGOR Shaman. Now, I've already done a TZAANGOR Shaman in-depth episode, and that does overlap a little bit with this one, but it's taken from the view of the TZAANGOR Shaman himself rather than the units that he's actually buffing. So why do you want to take this guy? Well, he has Bestial Prophet, which is add 1 to all hit rolls when you take a friendly TZAANGOR unit within 6 inches of the Shaman. So that's going to work in melee and in shooting. So whether you take Divining Spears or the Fate Caster Bows, you are now going to be hitting on a 2+. So adding a Shaman to nearby this unit, the Shaman can't be targeted because he is a character, but that +1 to hit for the TZAANGORs is really, really powerful. Now what you really want to do is combine that with certain psychic powers, and I'll cover the psychic powers to buff these guys in a moment, but while we just finish up the buffing units. There's one other type of unit that you can add to these guys to really maximise their effect. And that's going to be adding one of your senior psychers or one of your senior HQs to the unit, or being nearby the unit. In this case, I'm talking about an Exalted Sorcerer for the ability of Lord of the Thousand Sons, where you get to reroll hit rolls of 1 for friendly Thousand Sons units. So hitting on 2s with a reroll of 1 really maximises the output potential of your TZAANGOR Enlightened. Demon Princes have something similar. They can reroll 1s of friendly Thousand Sons. They could also do Tzeentch Demons as well because they are the Prince of Tzeentch. But similar kind of thing, right? You're looking for that reroll of 1, which most armies have on their characters these days. So let's talk psychic powers then. So if you've already got your TZAANGOR Shaman handy, there are a number of powers that he can take from the Discipline of Change. In order to make these guys much better, there is the option of Glamour of Tzeentch, which means until the start of the next psychic phase, your opponent must subtract 1 from any hit rolls that they make that target that unit. So not only is he increasing the abilities for these guys to hit, he can reduce the enemy's ability to hit them back. My second recommendation is Weaver of Fates, and this has only a warp charge of 6. It's pretty easy to get off. Both Glamour of Tzeentch is a 7, so that's relatively achievable as well. But with Weaver of Fates, if manifested, you increase the invulnerable save by 1. Bear in mind these guys come with a 5+ invulnerable save, increasing that to a 4+. And then if you can get Glamour of Tzeentch off as well, they are 4+ invulnerable and they are harder to hit. So a double combination like that is very, very effective in buffing your TZAANGOR Enlightened. Now to get those powers off, obviously you are going to need 2 Psychers to do that, as that TZAANGOR Shaman can only cast 1, or we can use a stratagem, which I'll discuss in a minute. But remember that the Shaman allows you to re-roll the first failed psychic test you make for that model. So if you're looking to get those powers off, he's a good one to do because you get that psychic power re-roll. Now the final key buffing unit for me is this guy. This is the Mutalith Vortex Beast. Now I've got a full painting guide on how I've achieved this effect on my one, and I'll put a little card up and a link in the description below to help you go and find it. But let's talk about the Mutalith Vortex Beast's powers that are specifically going to complement your TZAANGOR Enlightened. So the first one that you can pick is Chaotic Infusion, which adds 1 to that unit's strength characteristic. So this is going to make your TZAANGOR Enlightened a base strength of 5, which means that with their Divining Spear they're going to be strength 6. And that's one key advantage on that particular power over the Fate Caster Bows, because they have a fixed strength of 5, whereas the Divining Spear is a +1 to your stat line. So they can get to become strength 6. The next one is Temporal Flux, and this is the one that gets you a reroll on the charge. So if you're TZAANGOR Enlightened, which are pretty fast, which you can also complement with something like Warp Time maybe, although that will take you potentially out of range of this guy. What you're going to do is going to get that re-roll to a charge. And if they're already within 1 inch of an enemy unit, i.e. they're already engaged, you get to fight first in the fight phase as if it was the turn they charged. The final buffing power then is Ephemeral Touch. This is the one where you can increase the AP of one of the weapons in melee. So if you've got an AP 0 weapon, that becomes AP -1. In the case of the Divining Spear, they are AP -1. You're going to increase that to AP -2. Now that's going to have a real detrimental effect on enemy armor saves, especially things like Terminators and so on, reducing those down to their invulnerable save or at least a 50-50 save, and against most other things you could end up removing their save entirely. So you can see this guy really can benefit your TZAANGOR Enlightened quite nicely with one of those 3 powers. Now you only get to cast one by default, and it does cast on a 2+ when he's on his full stat line, but there are stratagems around that. So let's quickly talk about the stratagems to use on your buffing characters first to get the most out of those, which then by default and by proxy really affect your Enlightened. First is the Great Sorcerer. This allows you to cast a second power on one of your Psychers. So for example, we were talking earlier about the Shaman who only gets to cast 1. This ability will allow him to cast his second power, which is pretty useful. Second one again for the buffing characters is Kabbalistic Focus, allows you to add 2 to that casting power. So if you really are looking to get off that Glamour of Tzeentch or Weaver of Fates or whatever, this is a good one to get it off to make sure that these guys are protected. Now, I mentioned a few moments ago how to get that Mutalith to do 2 powers, so if you're looking for that extra ability, although this is a little bit more random, you can cast Baleful Vortex for 1 command point, and that means you randomly roll this time on the Mutalith Vortex power chart. But the chances are you could end up with something that you really need, such as that extra reroll on the charge or the extra AP on these guys. But the key stratagem for these, although it is expensive at 2 command points, although it is a very powerful ability, so justifiably so, is Cycle of Slaughter. This stratagem is used at the end of the fight phase, and you select a TZAANGOR unit from your army, which obviously these guys are. That unit can immediately fight an additional time. So if you've already piled on the buffs to these guys, such as the AP -2 or the extra strength and so on, you are going to get that extra round of attacks. Now it's obviously only really going to benefit you if you still have some decent numbers in your unit, or the enemy is sufficiently weakened and you just really need to finish that off. Maybe you're going for first blood, or it's an essential unit to claim an objective. So knowing what we now know about these guys, what's the best way to use them in my opinion? Well, there's a couple of ways really. One is potentially a sacrificial speed bump, where you send them forwards with their extreme speed and send them straight in to the enemy and tie an enemy unit up. If you can get off certain powers, you know, if you can make them -1 to be hit and give them a 4+ invulnerable save, they could potentially stick around for a fair while. Bear in mind they are less than 100 points for the versions that I've equipped. Secondly, you can use them as a really good flanking force and try and use them, go from cover to cover, move them around the board and try and get into the enemy sides or flanks. Thirdly, you can use them to claim objectives, again giving them the relative powers that we've talked about before, stick them on an objective and use them as a holding force. And really, if you've got the Fate Caster bow version, you can use them as really cool snipers. So although they can't target characters, you give them those powers where they hit on 2s and they can sit there with a 12-inch move and a 24-inch bow and arrow. They have an effective range of 36 inches, which can be pretty good. And if you're pinging out sort of 2 shots a guy here, 6 guys, you know, if you take 9, obviously you're going to double up on that amount of shots, and you just keep firing and pinging away. And with some of those bonuses that we've talked about with AP -2 shots and so on, 6 is automatically wounding, you can soon ping away and get rid of a few enemy units that you don't really want to be there. Finally then, what about anti-flyer duties? So we've already determined that you can get these guys up to strength 6 and you can sling them into flyers. They have the flyer keyword, you can engage enemy flyers in combat. And I find that could be pretty effective, to be honest, especially some of these lower toughness ones. You can get toughness 6 flyers, toughness 7 is probably more common, but if you use Cycle of Slaughter and some of the other abilities we've already talked about, you can potentially rip off quite a number of wounds, especially as you haven't got to worry about the shooting phase of being -1 to hit some of these flyers that have the hard to hit ability. Now, one final sneaky trick I want to kind of mention around these guys is around the Guided by Fate thing, which is each time you make a hit roll of a 6+. Now, with the Shaman, you're getting +1 to hit. So that means that any 5s or 6s now auto wound. And if you add prescience in from one of your other psychers, which is also a +1 to hit, you're effectively auto wounding now on a 50-50, on a 4+. Now that's going to be really scary against enemy monstrous creatures, enemy vehicles, pretty much anything. And especially if you're going in with a flat 2 damage, thanks to your charging ability there already with the Divining Spears, this can provide a really nasty but very cheap option to sling into the enemy. Before they've even realised what's going on, their Primaris Marines have all fallen apart, their vehicles are down to their bottom tier abilities, and then because they have the fly keyword, they can't be tied down in melee and then can Foxtrot Oscar immediately after in the following turn. So there we go then, guys. So that is another episode of In Depth all wrapped up. I'd love to know in the comment section below what you think of the TZAANGOR Enlightened. Are they underrated, overpowered, or just one of those units that you kind of don't think are a threat until they hit you? That's what I've been finding so far. I don't know whether it's just the fear of the unknown and you just think they're skinny little dudes riding around on discs and then they hit you and then they hurt you a lot. So I'd love to know in the comment section below what you think of the TZAANGOR Enlightened. Are you using them? Are you using them with Divining Spears or bows? That is the big question of the day for me. I think I can see merits for both, and I do see more competitive players running them with bows, but I am finding the Divining Spear to be bloody awesome. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys. If you did enjoy this video and you are enjoying the in-depth series, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.